Did you know that bugs are smarter than people? Stay tuned to find out what we can learn from bugs that relates to good eating, and also see delicious homemade bread made. Hello, I'm Marcella Lynch, and welcome to Food for Thought, the cooking show that features God's eating plan as unfolded through Scripture and through an understanding of God's other book, the Book of Nature. Our class today is featuring whole grain bread making. With bread readily available in supermarkets, I still make it a point to bake a weekly batch of homemade bread at home. My mother baked the family's bread when I was at home, and for 33 years I have done the same for my family. There's nothing so tasty and special as homemade bread. And instead of paying $2 or more for a good loaf of whole grain bread, you can make it for 50 cents or less a loaf. 4 people in our family, we save over $4 per year, not $4, $400 per year by making our own bread. I purchase wheat berries in 25-pound or 50-pound bags, store it in airtight containers, and grind it fresh on bread making day. Wheat keeps for years and years as long as you store it, so bugs cannot get into it. And speaking of bugs, did you know that weevils are smarter than people when it comes to knowing whether food is fit to eat? They always turn up their noses at white flour or bread in cupboards if whole wheat is available. What is the difference between whole wheat bread and white bread? I'd like to show you this kernel of wheat chart here, and we can see what the difference is between white bread and whole wheat bread. You can see here that there's 3 parts to the kernel of wheat. The outer covering is the bran. This little yellow part down here is the germ, and the inside part is the endosperm. On the outside part is the fiber, the minerals and vitamins, that's the bran layers. Down here is the germ, in which is the vitamins, especially the E vitamins and the wheat germ oil. This is the life-giving part of the kernel. If you planted this seed in the field, it would sprout from right here. And then the whole center part of the kernel of wheat is the starch and the protein. We call that the endosperm. So when you're grinding whole wheat flour, you just put the whole kernel in there, and it comes out of your flour mill whole wheat flour. When you're using white breads and you're grinding and using, not grinding, but when you're baking with white flour, you're just getting this endosperm part. And that's the difference between the white and the whole wheat. Eating God's way of whole foods is not being pulled apart by humans. It means eating whole grain bread, doesn't it? The bread we're going to make today is a multi-grain bread, and I like to add several other ingredients to it. So let's just start now and talk about making good homemade bread that is really nourishing, and the weevils will get into it because they're smart. I want to show you first of all wheat. It's kind of important to have the right kind of flour when you make whole wheat bread if you want it to be elastic and light. So I have here 3 different kinds of wheat, and these are the kind here for bread making. This is hard red on this side, and this is the hard white, and either one of them will make good whole wheat bread. This one here is very light colored, you can see that, and this is pastry wheat. And when you buy pastry flour in the market and you buy whole wheat pastry flour, it's made out of this wheat right here, and it doesn't really have very much of that kind of protein in it called gluten. That is the one protein that wheat has that will give that elastic texture to the bread. Wheat is the only grain that has the protein gluten in it that when kneaded and stretched will make that elastic texture that can make bread rise and make it sliceable and fun for you to make sandwiches and slices. So you need this kind of wheat here, either the hard red or the hard white wheat, in order to get that elastic texture that the gluten protein gives to it. Now, if you've ever heard of I'm sure you use the all-purpose flour in the supermarket. All-purpose means it's kind of okay for bread and it's kind of okay for cookies and cakes. What they do is they mix part hard wheat and part soft wheat together and you get sort of a general all-purpose flour. But at home we can be professional and we can use just hard wheat for bread and we can use just soft wheat. And that's a little trick in your natural food kitchen to get light, elastic, whole grain products is by using the right product. For example, if you tried to make a pie crust out of this hard wheat, you'd get a tough whole wheat crust, but you make it out of the soft wheat, you get a wonderful flaky crust. So that's just a little lesson in your wheats for today. We have over here a nice variety of some other grains. It's wonderful to mix the different kind of grains together when you make bread. I find the texture and, of course, the nutrition is enhanced greatly when you mix other kinds of grains. And it's kind of hard to tell them apart. They look a little bit alike right now. I tell my students in the classes that it's like a mother when she has twins. After a while, you get so the mother knows them exactly. She can tell them apart. But some other people that don't know them very well, they just get the twins all mixed up and can't remember which is which. It's kind of like that with these grains. They don't look alike to me because I'm familiar with them and I've used them in my kitchen for so long, and they're different in texture, they're different in color, they have a different flavor, and it's wonderful to get used to using all the kinds. This is barley here. We have some oats. This is the same kind of oats that most of you use as rolled oats. It flattens the oats and it's very wonderful and nutritious. This is more of the soft wheat. We have barley here, and we have rye up here in the front, and this is buckwheat groats. This again is the hard red wheat. So it's just wonderful to store these whole grains in your home, and if you're fortunate enough to have a flour mill, which we have here today, we can grind our own flour. Now, Myrna is going to help me today. Hi, Myrna. Why don't we go ahead and bring the flour in? We ground some whole wheat flour ahead, but I just want to grind a little more for you so that you can kind of see how this grinds. I'd like to just take some of this hard wheat here and just mix it with a little of this light colored hard wheat, and we'll just put a little bit more through the mill so that you can see how wonderful it is. First of all, we just turn it on, and then we just put the grain in there. Just don't do it all. Sounds like our jet landed. That's a very powerful mill, and it grinds over a pound a minute, and you can have wonderful fresh flour at any moment. And here we have our fresh flour for the bread, and we've also ground a little bit ahead. I'll tell you, you can make bread for 50 cents a loaf, but besides that, it's that memories that your children are going to have when you have the homemade bread and the dinner rolls and the whole wheat pizza and all those different fun things like cinnamon rolls without the cinnamon and sugar. You can make wonderful things. So what we'll do here is talk about the recipe first. In our Cooking by the Book cookbook, we have a whole chapter in here about bread making. In fact, if you want to know the truth, the bread making chapter is the longest one of all because I love to make bread, and we have many different kinds of bread that you can make. So on page 77 of the cookbook, it's got the basic bread recipe. Now we have a kitchen machine here that we're going to use today that has a 3-sided kneading arm, and this is an easy way to make bread. If you don't have this convenience of a mixer, then you just get your big bowl and a big wooden spoon and you do this by hand, and you can skip some of the bread making steps when you have this machine, because with this 3-sided kneading arm it can stretch the dough so quickly and nicely that you don't need to knead it for all those minutes by hand and let it rise and punch it down. From the time we start making this bread here until it's coming out of the oven is less than 2 hours. And it only takes about 15 or 20 minutes of your personal time, and you come out with 5 or 6 big loaves of bread or several loaves of bread with a lot of other kinds of dinner rolls and things. So it's a lot of fun. And you can freeze these loaves of bread and just pull one at a time out of your freezer and have bread all week long. So once a week is just about how often I make bread at home. All right, so it says here that we need to grind 10 cups of wheat, and we've already done that. And the rule of thumb is if you put 1 cup of grain in your mill, you're going to get 1.5 cups of flour underneath. So if we grind what it says here, 10 cups of hard red wheat, or the white wheat, then that gives you about 16 cups of flour when you get through, 14 to 16 cups. Now, one thing about making bread is that you don't need to worry about measuring things too accurately, because every time you make bread, that water will absorb the flour in a little different proportion. Actually, when you add other grains besides wheat to the mixture of flour, they absorb differently. Their content is a little different. So don't worry about measuring too accurately. And in this mix that we have milled today, we actually put some barley, some oats, and some rye here with our bread. So we have like 4 or 5 grain bread here. Now we're just going to start with 6 cups of water. Make it warm, or sort of extra warm. It goes right into the mixer here. And we have the measures right on the side, so I had it measured up here to the 6 cup mark. And we'll add 1/3 cup of oil, but we don't always use oil. You can put applesauce in. You can put any kind of mashed dried fruits in, or you can just skip the oil. French bread, you know, only has about 1 tablespoon of oil, and that's all. So let's just go on and skip the oil. It's 1/3 cup of honey, molasses, dates, or something for sweetening. So we're going to take this spatula here, and I've made bread so often that I'm just going to put what I know is about 1/3 cup of honey. And let's go ahead and put just a little molasses in here for fun too. It doesn't really matter, does it, Myrna, that you measure exactly how much of everything you put in here?
It works out anyway. It's wonderful.
You know, I always tell people you can't really wreck bread. As long as you get the consistency right and the thickness of it, it'll be just fine. So we need about 1.5 tablespoons of salt here.
Do you want your yeast first?
Yeah, I'm going to wait a little bit on the yeast. We have so many wonderful new kinds of yeast now that you just throw the yeast right in with the dry ingredients.
That's the salt.
That's the salt. Yeah, we need 1.5 tablespoons of salt here. Okay. And let's see, the next thing is 3 tablespoons of yeast, but we're just going to wait a minute on that because we're going to just go ahead and let's see what else. That's it. I want to add now about 8 cups of this freshly milled flour and let it get a dough basically going first, and then we'll put the yeast in. Right? So you don't really need to measure how much flour you put in. I don't know if that's because we kind of are experienced, or if, you know, you'll get onto it after just a little. I'll move this over here. You want to get a dough.
I've always been afraid to put my salt in so soon because I heard that wouldn't let my yeast work.
But did you notice we haven't put the yeast in yet?
I know. You're showing me a new trick. I'm pleased to learn this.
So actually, we'll just add the yeast a little later. This is the rapid rise yeast, but it works just the same. I'll just go ahead and put all that in there. That looks about right. Okay, let's put that lid on there. Okay, and we'll just get that started here. Always use the very low speed for bread making. All right, one of the tricks to making your whole grain breads really light and elastic is a couple extra ingredients that we put in this recipe here, and it's 3 tablespoons of commercially prepared dough enhancer. Now, if you have trouble finding that, and I think you probably will have trouble finding that, you can add a tablet of vitamin C and about a tablespoon or 2 of lecithin granules. This is some magic in bread. It helps your bread to rise lighter and to stay moist longer. And you know, the reason whole wheat bread generally dries out faster than white bread is because it's got that fiber and that bran, and of course it's supposed to dry out. In fact, if you want to know the truth, it's more digestible when it's drier bread. And so what we need to do here, Myrna, is just crush up this vitamin C tablet here with the back of this spoon. You want to do that? Sure. Just do it maybe in this lid here. Put it there. And this was just like a 500 milligram vitamin C. It doesn't have to be 500. You could put 250 in. But it's just a chemical reaction that takes place in the bread to help it to be lighter and more elastic. Okay, just go ahead and put that right in there. And then this is the liquid lecithin, and if you have the granules, that's just as fine. We'll just put a little bit of that here. And you can buy this at the health food store. It just lasts a long time. In fact, I make a homemade kind of a non-stick spray, but I don't use it in a spray bottle. But you can take half lecithin and half like corn oil or some vegetable oil. Keep that in a little bottle mixed together, and you can use that to brush right on your bread pans, and it creates a non-stick surface. That's exactly what's in these sprays, except that it also has an aerosol. So you can create your own, and that recipe's also in our book. Okay, so another trick, if you're adding these other grains, remember that these other grains do not have the gluten protein that makes bread elastic. If you add too many non-wheat type of grains to your whole grain bread, that's just going to make it more heavy and more crumbly. So if you want to have a little trick to make it still be light and elastic, but go ahead and add 6 or 7 other small portions of some of the other grains, then just keep on hand a little gluten flour. We have this gluten flour that you can get from the natural food store. And let's put about, that's all hooked in there. Oh, it doesn't matter, maybe a half a cup. This is going to make like 5 or 6 loaves of bread, so it's a big batch. And we can put maybe 3/4 of a cup. It's just whatever you prefer on that. All right, so let's just add the yeast, and for the yeast you need 3 packages or 3 tablespoons of either the active dry yeast or the instant rise yeast. And we'll just tear this open and put it in, and you can add it near the last. It makes very nice light bread even when you throw it in at the very last. One time when my son was in the 6th grade, he was so proud to demonstrate bread making for his class. And he forgot the yeast. He took what he thought was yeast, and it was breadcrumbs out of my refrigerator. And he actually realized too late that he had no yeast in there. So we added it at the very last minute, and it worked out just fine and saved the day for him. I'm just adding some more flour here, enough to make it a little heavier dough, and you just keep the machine running and add the flour gradually until the dough is at such a consistency that it starts pulling away from the sides of the bowl. You'll see that here. All right, the dough has mixed for 10 minutes here, and that made it all nice and elastic without us even needing to touch it. Now, if you're doing this by hand, you would simply put this out on the board and work it. I'm going to demonstrate a little to you so you can see how to knead bread by hand if you're not so fortunate to have a bread making machine here. Let's put a little flour out here on the board so that we can work our dough, and we're going to make a lot of interesting things from this whole wheat dough that we have here. So we'll take it out of the bowl and see what we can do. It's nice and stretchy, and that means that that special kind of protein that's in wheat has been made very elastic. So you see, the first trick is to get the right kind of flour from the hard wheat for bread making. And the second trick is to get it developed and to get it elastic, and that can only happen by kneading. And so the old-fashioned way is to knead it for 10 or 15 minutes by hand, and the easy way is to use a bread making machine. Put a little more flour here, and we'll just put it all out. This is a large batch of dough. You could make 5 loaves of big loaves of bread, or you could make a lot of different dinner rolls and sweet rolls. And we're going to show you a nice variety of things that you can do from this one basic dough. Right? I'll just give this to you, Myrna. Well, I'll just put it right down here as a place for it. And now we have room to work here. So we don't need to work this anymore because it's been in the machine. But let me just show you how you would work this by hand. Have you ever heard that old saying that a heavy hand makes heavy bread? That's really true. You can watch a person knead bread and you can tell whether the bread is going to be heavy or not. And you want more of a wrist action, kind of a stretching to the dough when you're kneading bread by hand. You know, don't just go plunk and like this, you know, real heavy-handed, because you're not doing what it needs to have done. You need to stretch it. So you turn it a quarter of a turn, keep flour under it so it doesn't stick. You bring it up and you push and stretch it back. You give it another quarter turn, you bring it up and you push it back. So this is the slow motion. And you just keep kneading it like this until you get it all kneaded for about 10 or 15 minutes. And you want it to just bounce back at you when you poke into it like that, so that you'll know that it's nice and elastic. Once you get it all kneaded, if it's a by hand method, you need to put it aside in a bowl, cover it and let it rise and punch it down. But this is kneaded so efficiently that we can just start shaping the dough. So let's make a regular loaf of bread that you would put in a bread pan. Myrna will take one of those bread pans, and you take your one portion of dough that you're going to put in a regular bread pan. I'll just let you spray that for me too. You want to be sure to use a non-stick spray or a hard type of shortening so that it will, oil still will, it will really stick if you use oil. But whatever the size of bread pan that you use, you want to fill it 2/3 full of dough, because the loaf needs to be bouffant over the top. So you want to let it double in size before you bake it. You always let the dough rise before you put it in the oven. And if you don't fill it 2/3 full, then it won't be so pretty when you take it out of the oven. So I'm just flattening this dough into the shape of my pan, which is a rectangle here. And I'm just going to roll it up into a tight ball like this. And be sure you put the seam on the bottom, and you just put it in the pan. And you see, if it's 2/3 full of dough, then when it's doubled in size, it will be rounded over. So this needs to set aside here, Myrna, and we're going to cover it with a dry towel and let that raise for a little while until it's double, and then we pop it into the oven. And in your cookbook, it tells you here that it's 350 for about 45 minutes that bakes. Now you can bake bread in cans, and this is just a juice can. You can have all different sizes and shapes of dough. And let's just put one little bit of dough, Myrna, in that can so that we can you just fill it half full of dough, and then when it's risen up to the top, it's ready to bake also. So you don't have to buy a lot of expensive pans. Is this already greased?
That's already
okay.
sprayed.
Great. And you can just shape your dough and just put it in there. And I love the round loaves. They're real fun to do. And we have some here that are heart-shaped, and those are cute. You can do the same thing. Fill them half full of dough, and when you get all through, you have a heart-shaped loaf of bread. And you can buy little kits like that to work with. All right, let's make a loaf of peasant bread here, Myrna. If you want to make a nice peasant loaf of bread, did we bring sesame seeds out here? We can just make it right here on a cookie sheet, and you could do French bread as well. But you can just simply make a round loaf of bread here. That's okay, no problem. We will just skip the sesame seeds. Make it round, and you can put it, if you have some sesame seeds or some poppy seeds you want to put over the loaf, then you can simply wet this with water or a little milk, and then the sesame seeds will stick to it. And then slit it about 3 times. You know that's the way the peasant bread looks when you buy it. And when this raises, then you just bake it also in the oven, and it gets nice and crispy and crusty, and I love this kind of bread. So there we have the peasant bread. I thought maybe you'd like to see how to braid some bread. So let's take 3 strands of dough here, and we'll just kind of make kind of like a braided bread. You can play with your dough and do all kind of things with it. You need to make ropes, actually, 3 nice ropes like this. And I'm working kind of fast because we're almost out of time here. And Myrna, why don't you go ahead and bring up the finished bread that we baked ahead to show everyone when we get through playing with our dough here.
I'm on the way.
Okay. I think we'll just maybe set it right here on this area right here.
All right.
We'll be looking at our breads. And we have one more rope here we're going to make. Just show you how you can, yeah, you could take more time to make your ropes, but you just have a lot of fun. You can tie knots, take a rope and tie a knot in it, and you can have dinner rolls of all different shapes. You can make pizza crust and pocket bread and everything from this same dough. I don't know if we have another, maybe this cookie sheet pan here, Myrna, you could bring it. And we can just put this on the cookie sheet before we actually make it into a braided bread here. Just spray that a little bit. So we'll lay these ropes right in here, stick the ends together here, and then you just start braiding like this. Pick them up, put them over. And if you wanted to, you could make it a little sweet dough type with naturally sweet things, crushed pineapple, and just make raisins and nuts all over it.
Just sprinkle them over. Do you want to put a few?
All kind of fancy things you can do. We have a little tiny piece of dough here left. Myrna, you play with that. And I'll just show you how to make some dinner rolls. You can take the same dough here, and you can just roll all kinds of fun little dinner rolls. Find a little kind of dry place on the counter here, and just kind of form them. That pan there, I guess you prepared for dinner rolls. And that goes right in here. You can put like 3 across. I'll just let you put this right here. I'll do a couple more here. I just love to play with bread dough. And it's very nice. Our children learned how to make bread when they were really young, and it's something that they give to their teachers and to people for gifts. And when our son got to be older, he impressed his girlfriend's mother with bread. And we've had a wonderful time making bread today, and it just went all too fast. And we just hope that you will notice these good, nourishing breads here. We have the peasant bread, and we have the regular loaves. Here's the one baked in a can. And so that's it. We've had all our breads in and out of the oven, our dinner rolls, our peasant bread, and all of these wonderful whole grain breads. We thank you for tuning in, and this program is sponsored by the Three Angels Broadcasting Network, and we appreciate your prayers and support.
If you've enjoyed the recipes and cooking tips in this program, you'll want to order our Food for Thought resource sheet. We'll tell you how you can order the cookbooks you've seen used on this program, along with other information that will help you cook healthful, attractive vegetarian meals. For your free copy of our Food for Thought resource sheet, please write to us at Food for Thought, P.O. Box 220, West Frankfort, Illinois 62896, or call 618-627-4651.